I'll never forget that day. I was on my usual bus ride, heading to work, just trying to get through the morning. The bus was crowded, and there was a tension in the air, but nothing unusual for rush hour. As I walked down the aisle to find a seat, I noticed something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A black man, no older than I was having a conversation with the bus driver. At first, I couldn't hear much, but there was something off about the interaction. The bus driver, an older white man, was speaking to him in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. His words were sharp, dismissive, and rude. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something didn't feel right. As I stood there, trying to figure out what was happening, I saw it. Out of nowhere, the bus driver swung his fist and punched the black man in the face. The sound of it was horrifying. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man stumbled back, his face in shock, and for a second, the whole bus went silent. It was like the world stopped. I could feel my heart racing. The black man didn't fight back. He just stood there, rubbing his jaw in disbelief. I wanted to say something, to step in and stop it, but the moment was surreal. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would someone be so cruel, just because of the color of his skin? But then, the bus driver did something even more shocking. As soon as he saw the flashing lights of a police car outside the bus, he went pale. The officers, who had clearly witnessed the whole thing, wasted no time. They got on the bus, immediately heading toward the driver. The bus driver tried to talk his way out of it, but his words came out weak and full of panic. The officers were firm, and they didn't care about the excuses. I saw the black man still standing there, his body trembling, as if the shock of what had just happened hadn't fully settled in yet. His hand was pressed against his cheek, the bruise already starting to form, a dark mark that would be a physical reminder of the cruelty he had just endured. But I knew, deep down, that the physical pain was the least of what he would carry from this. The emotional weight of that moment, the humiliation, the anger, the confusion, it was all there in his eyes. He didn't ask for this. No one should ever have to endure something like that, especially not in a place where they should have been safe, just trying to get from one point to another. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be treated as less than, to be dehumanized in front of a bus full of strangers. The injustice of it was suffocating. It hit me harder than I expected. The fact that this wasn't a one-time incident for him. For people like him, this kind of thing happens over and over again, sometimes in the most subtle ways and sometimes in the most violent ways. It wasn't just about this bus ride. It was another chapter in a lifetime of injustices. Moments when the color of his skin made him a target, when people made assumptions about him before they even got to know him. It was the silent battles he had fought for years, day after day, just trying to live in a world that so often treated him as less than human. This punch wasn't the first, and sadly, it probably wouldn't be the last. But in that moment, as the bus driver stood frozen, waiting for the police to come, something shifted. I watched as the officers approached, their presence steady and firm, and I felt a small, fragile sense of relief. There was a sense of justice in the air. Real, tangible justice. The kind that you can hold on to, even if just for a moment, when the right thing actually happens. The police weren't just there as bystanders. They were there to make sure the bus driver faced consequences for his actions. They weren't looking the other way or making excuses. They were stepping in, holding him accountable, and I could see in their eyes that they knew this was wrong. For a split second, I thought about the man standing there, his hand still pressed to his cheek, probably still processing everything that had just happened. In that moment, the powerlessness I had felt earlier started to fade. I wasn't sure if the man would ever forget what had just happened, or if this small act of justice would be enough to heal the wounds he had just experienced. But I hoped, at least, that he would find some peace in knowing that someone who was supposed to protect and serve, was willing to stand up for him in that moment. Maybe that would be the spark of hope he needed. Maybe that would make him feel like, just for once, someone had his back. It wasn't enough to undo the damage that had been done, but it was a start. And for someone who had faced so many struggles in his life, maybe that small moment of accountability, that sign that things don't always go unchecked, would make a difference in how he saw the world. At least, that's what I told myself. Because for once, it felt like there was a glimmer of justice in an unjust world. As the driver was escorted off the bus in cuffs, I could see the mixture of fear and anger on his face. It felt like justice was being served, but it was hard to feel anything other than a deep sadness. It shouldn't have taken the police to make this right. It should have never happened in the first place. When the bus started moving again, the air was thick with tension. No one said anything, but I could feel the weight of what had just occurred. The black man didn't speak either, but I could see him glancing out the window, as if trying to process the cruelty he had just faced. That day will always stay with me. It wasn't just about the punch or the shocking way it happened. It was the deeper realization of how pervasive racism is, how it exists in places we often don't expect. I'd never imagined something like that would happen on a bus, something so brutal and open. But there it was, right in front of me, a reminder that racism doesn't need to be hidden to be real. It's in the small, hurtful moments, the things people say or do, whether they think anyone's watching or not. It's in the way someone can look at another person and see them as less than, as unworthy of basic respect. And it's not just about the big acts of hate, it's in the quiet ones too. The offhand comments, the stares, the moments when someone is made to feel like they don't belong. The pain from something like that doesn't just disappear. It lingers, building up over time, leaving scars that are hard to heal. I could see that in the man's eyes, in the way he stood there after the punch, as if trying to shake it off, but knowing it wasn't something that could just be forgotten. His face wasn't just bruised, it was marked with something much deeper. The emotional wound that comes from having to face such hatred and the unfairness of it all can be far harder to heal than any physical injury. But even with all that, there was something about that moment of justice that stuck with me. When the police stepped in, when they took the bus driver away in handcuffs, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a perfect solution. It didn't undo the hurt that had already been caused, and it didn't erase the years of struggle that so many people like the man on the bus have to live with. But it was something. In that moment, I saw a glimmer of hope. That sometimes, even in a world that feels so broken, there are moments when right can overcome wrong. Maybe, just maybe, that instant karma for the bus driver was a reminder that justice doesn't always wait for perfect conditions. Sometimes it shows up when you least expect it, in the form of someone who decides they've had enough, in the form of a police officer who steps in without hesitation, or in the form of a community who doesn't stand by when injustice happens. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like a victory, a sign that maybe, just maybe, the world is capable of correcting itself when the time comes.